Have others maybe will drag in later. That's how it usually is. Everybody works on Destin time. And we didn't get finished till 11:32, so we're right on time, right? I asked Todd this morning, and I said, are you going to go over? He said, yes, but don't worry about it. So I'm not worrying about it. If y'all not worrying about it, I'm not worried about it. He said the longer he goes, then the longer I go, then the time, the time for the meeting will be shorter. So, does anyone subscribe to the Christian Chronicle? Is anyone familiar with the Christian Chronicle? It's a publication based in Oklahoma. It's put out by Churches of Christ. Kind of gives you the good news of what's going on in the brotherhood. It's gotten. That depends on perspective. Hold on a minute. These things, I may have to pull out my old glasses. I just want to bring this out. On the latest edition on page 3, there's an article about a former minister sentenced to 45 years in prison for sexual, doing kids. What was the charge? Sexual abuse in his ministry. His name is Joshua Burton Henley. He is no relation. I just want to make that official. So, because it's on page 3, so it kind of sticks out when you open the paper up. No. Anyway, anybody do their homework? Did anybody do, other than reading the story, did they do the other homework, the additional homework? Do you even remember what it was?
Yes. What was the oldest age of the people that entered the promised land?
Other than Joshua and Caleb? Well, that was the question. Well, that's your answer. So you're saying 40 is the oldest?
No. 20 to 40, that's 60.
Well, he said
20 to 40.
He said 40 is what he said. 19 and 40 is 59. That's what you're saying. All right. Anybody else have something else? 77. And how'd you come up with that? Other than them, what was the age? Whatever they are is what you're saying. Okay. All right. Well, we know in the first census, the 20 year there was a cutoff for 20 years. Everybody older than that didn't go into the promised land. Census 2, 38 to 40 years later, again they were counting 20-year-olds and more. That was to find out how many soldiers they had available. So that would have been 60 for them. But were the Levites counted in any of those two censuses? No, they were not. They were counted in a separate census later. Numbers 3, I believe it is. Yeah, Numbers 3, chapter 3. The Levites were counted beginning at the age of 1 month, and went up from there. Numbers 4 talks about the Moses and Aaron counted the Levites from 30 to 50, and that was for the people, the ages of the people to work in the tabernacle. So if anybody was 50 plus the 40, they would have been 90. But the key is, back in the census, in Numbers 1 and then Numbers 26, there's two key phrases that we always miss. That is, 20 years old or more who were able to serve in the army. So there was women and children. Of course, children wouldn't have been able to go into the army. But women wouldn't have gone in the army. There may have been some older women in that group. Also, the Levites, when the census was done with them, it was 30 to 50 but there are probably some Levites older than 50. So that would have made people maybe older than 90. So the answer is, other than Joshua and Caleb, what was the age of the oldest Israelites to reach the promised land? We really don't know. There's no record in the Bible of an age. There's these examples of census, but the key is are more. So many certain age or more. So, what? Perhaps that is correct. So, you have to. Does that meet your acceptance, Deborah?
Yeah, except God did say able to serve in the war. He said,
Saved in the army.
he said, those 20 years old and older who saw my glory will not enter.
Well, Numbers 145, all the Israelites 20 years old or more who were able to serve in the Israel's army.
That's who was numbered.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about in Deuteronomy where he said they won't enter.
Well, I'm looking at Numbers. Yeah, that's what she's saying. Yeah. And Gary's question was, and he's not here, but Deborah answered it last week. What's the difference in the census numbers? Remember, there was an 1,800 number difference in the first census and the second census. Most people just think it was because of the different plagues and diseases and that sort of thing. So that's the answers to that. Anybody have any questions or comments? All right, chapter 7. You have in your notes just a little opening comment. When the story of Joshua opens, the Israelites were outside the promised land while the Canaanites were inside. In order for God's divine plan to move forward, the Israelites needed to go in and the Canaanites needed to come out. Giving you a lesson breakdown of the different chapters that we'll be covering and then the main points of the video. Let me point out one thing about the video versus, anybody have, I know Jennifer Bailey does, anyone else listen to the audio book each chapter each week? Chris, did you notice what he was named, how he was pronouncing the town in the very beginning? It's spelled A-I. Did you notice how he pronounced it?
I don't remember, but it was different.
Okay. In the audio book, he pronounced it I. He spelled it A-I, and he pronounced it I. I grew up learning it as AI was the name I've always pronounced it. Randy in this video calls it AI, and I'll be referring to it as AI. So that's kind of how I learned to say it. I consulted with David Bailey earlier. That's how he learned to say it, and probably most of y'all, that's how y'all learned to say it. So anyway. Huh? Well, artificial means not real, so that's not real intelligence. If you get into that. So, David, you want to start the video, and then we'll discuss it. Video. Any questions about the video? I'm going to plan 2 with my older glasses. It's just easier to deal with that microphone this way. Okay. Because of time, I'm going to kind of fly through this. We'll stop at some certain points and kind of take care of them a little bit deeper. But you have the notes in your hands. I've identified the pages in the books it comes from, and also Scripture. So if we don't cover something that's particularly interesting to you, hopefully you can go back and study it on your own. But I'm going to try to get us out of here by 11:30. That's my plan, Todd. So I told him what you said this morning about going over. So anyway, so starts out. Joshua 1, verses 1 through 3. God tells Joshua to cross the Jordan, lead the people to Israel into the land that he would give them. He would be with Joshua just as he's been with Moses. He describes the area that he's going to give them. Todd went over that this morning, the actual area. So what? But he gave them Joshua had 3 conditions, or God gave Joshua 3 conditions for this promise. What was that? Page 89. Be strong and courageous. And there's another one. Obey the law. That's from verses 6 and 7. And then he repeats the strong and courageous in verse 9. Joshua 1. So Joshua commands the leaders of the people to prepare provisions and be ready to go in 3 days. He gives them a 3-day warning. Joshua speaks to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, and said that they said they would do what he said to do and go where he said to go. Joshua probably said, "Yeah, right, we've heard this story before." But anyway, so no, this group was. Yeah, this group was. I was just being facetious, Deborah. So it's the first time I've ever done that. So Joshua chapter 2, Joshua secretly sends 2 men as spies to view the land and especially look at Jericho. Why do you think he sent these spies as secret versus the way Moses did with the 12? Moses with the 12 made a pretty big deal about it. Why would Joshua have sent these spies in secretly? It's not. I mean, this is an opinion question.
Maybe he didn't want to mess this up. He didn't be swayed.
Didn't want to be swayed.
Yeah, by
Other peers, some others. What did you say, David?
basically the same thing. Don't want anybody to mess this up.
Yeah.
Tells us why. I mean, she tells the spies why.
Yeah.
We're scared to death of you.
Yeah. Well, the reason he sent the 2 in is probably like Wayne and David has said. The 12 didn't go so well for Moses, so he just wanted to kind of keep it to the 2 that he knew he could trust. Do we have the names of these spies? No.
Those 2 were found out. Jericho, they knew they were there.
Oh yeah. I'm just saying the report back though. He didn't want. He knew he could trust these guys in their report. Question number 2. They had not booked a place to stay through Airbnb, so they stayed where? Stayed with Rahab, and as Todd alluded to, she was a harlot or prostitute. Depends on the translation you're actually reading. So Rahab hides the spies, but word gets out to the king. The king sends some detectives around asking about them, and what does Rahab do? Yeah, she lies. What we could say in South Alabama, a bald-faced lie. Yeah, but she said, what did she say?
She said they were here.
Yeah, it says they were here, but I don't know where they were from, and I don't know where they are.
So that wasn't a lie, was it? It's omission.
Omission, yeah. Stretching the truth, maybe. Yeah, stretching the truth. So anyway, why would the king why would Rahab have been questioned? Is the question, number 3. Why was she questioned?
They probably got reports that two foreigners, two strangers were seen.
Yeah, I mean, we got the report. The 2 foreigners are seen at Rahab's house. Why don't they go to Rahab? And they may have went somewhere else, but why would it have not been unusual for them to know strangers would have been at Rahab's house? Exactly. This was her business, was entertaining guests. Have to put it mildly in church, you know. So yeah, it was not unusual for people to come in and out of her house. Some, visitors or strangers doing that. So she tells a blatant lie. Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they are from. It came about when it was time to shut the gate dark. In other words, the king's army went out the gate. They shut the gate so no one could come in and out. So if they were still in town, they couldn't get out. So Rahab went to where? Where were they? Yeah, they were up on the roof. Up on the roof. So was it okay for Rahab to lie? And is this a time when the end justifies the means? Why? Why is it okay now and not? Do what, Christy? Doing the Lord's work? Does that give us rights to lie? Okay. Yes, Sherry. Is there a word called righteous justification or something like that? So I agree with you, Christy. She was okay at this point because, first of all, this is part of the upper story, isn't it? This whole thing is part of the upper story. So.
And I thought it was interesting that all of the mention of her family and everything, her lifestyle must have been acceptable to the family for a moment when they're together.
They were all there together, weren't they? Yeah. We'll talk about that in just a second, but yeah.
Also recognize this army's been marching around their city. If I were her family, I'd have got myself there.
Yeah, well, they're not at this point, but yeah, the end result is, yeah. So
Sometimes God uses sin to bring about His will.
He does, yeah,
Judas was a good example.
yeah,
But because she lied didn't make that lying right.
correct,
And I think the fact that she lied, God used that. Maybe He even used the fact that she was a prostitute, known to lie,
yeah,
as where they were going to be
yeah,
protected that way.
yeah,
So I think that saying, is it wrong to lie? Yeah, still wrong to lie.
yeah. So the spies are up on the roof. Rahab goes up on the roof and tells them what, or asks what? Y'all remember the story?
Give them direction to, hold out for a bit, let them go and come back, and then they can go free.
Okay, first of all, she goes up there and says, the people of Jericho are scared of you, right? They had heard the story about how the Lord had brought them across the dry land through the desert up to that point, but made a dry path for you through the Red Sea, Joshua 2, verse 10. So the spies promised Rahab that they would be merciful and faithful. Oh, she asked if they would be merciful and faithful, merciful to her and her family. Point number 4, question number 4. The spies promised Rahab that they would be merciful and faithful to her, but there are 3 conditions. What were the 3 conditions? Now, if you look at the book on page 91, only one of the conditions is listed, but there are actually 3 conditions that we get from verses 17 through 21. But what's the one in the book, Deborah? Oh, well, which one?
She
I couldn't write them out. That's what the book says. Yeah. Don't, you must not later turn on the spies, was how the book puts it. Anybody see the other two, if you're looking in Scripture?
Cord had to be there, and they could not leave the house.
Correct. Had to hang a what color cord? Yeah, specific. It's a scarlet rope or cord out the window to identify which apartment or house she's actually in. And then the family must be inside during the battle. Her family has to be inside. So anybody she wants to be saved has to be in her house with that rope hanging out the window so the soldiers will know who and where they are. Yeah, if they left the house and the soldiers came around, they just too bad, so sad. Yeah. So Rahab lets down the rope through the window, tells them to hide in the hill country for 3 days before heading home. And if you read the background of that, you know that the army was going to be searching for them for 3 days, then they would come back into town, then the spies could go back to Joshua. After 3 days, the spies returned to Joshua, and what did the spies report? Yeah, we got this. With God's help, we got this. So anyway, chapters 3, 4, and 5 are not specifically in the book. Joshua chapter 3 is kind of hinted at or implied. That's where the people actually crossed the Jordan River. And how did they cross? Anybody know the story? Yeah, they crossed on dry land, just like the Israelites had through the Red Sea. Chapter 4 is talking about crossing the river, building a memorial at Gilgal. And then chapter 5 talks about the circumcision of Israel that the video talked about. Randy, in the video, talked about how this was an outward identification for them, outwardly identifying them as belonging to God. We have some religious friends who baptize children not for salvation, but this is what they say. This is kind of in line with this Old Testament covenant of identifying them in the family of God. Has anybody ever ran into someone who believes that or thinks that? Okay. So anyway, chapter 6. The gates of Jericho were tightly shut. No one went in or out. The Lord tells Joshua to have all the armed men or the men of war and 7 priests march or walk around the walls of Jericho once per day for 6 days. What did God tell the men to do on the 7th day? March around 7 times. What did Joshua tell the people not to do on the 7th day? No shouts. Yeah, do not say a word or shout until the 7th day. So the first 6 days, everybody marched around and the trumpets played, but no one said a word. And then on the 7th day, they marched around, trumpets played, or whatever you do, the trumpets played trumpets. Joshua said, shout, and the people shouted, and the walls came tumbling down. So, for you military people, was this a good military strategy, just to walk around the city and blow trumpets and shout? Not generally. It probably would not have worked today, right? So.
Plus you couldn't justify building all those bombs.
Well, that's true. And you wouldn't have a job.
It was psychologically intimidating.
Yeah, it was a psychological maneuver, wasn't it? So. That's my next question. It's not on your sheet, but that is my question. Did the walls fall inward or outward? Outward. Why were they falling outward versus inward?
The excavation shows that they fell outward, but had they fallen inward, it could have been accused that they had battering ram the walls down, that God had not.
David, go to the next slide. You got a little graphic there in your handout. It's kind of hard to look at, so I put it up on the screen. See at the far right, the little green area where the little people are? That's supposedly the people there that retaining wall, supposedly, now Todd said he had conflicting information, and I did too. But the general, what I found, the retaining wall was some 12 to 15 feet high, with a mud brick wall 6 feet thick, 20 to 26 feet high on top of that. That's that first wall. Then you go up the slope to the second wall. At the crest of the embankment was a similar mud brick wall whose base was roughly 46 feet above ground level. And I'm thinking that wall above that was another 20 to 26 feet to the top of the wall. So excavations have found that the walls fell outward. Now, if you look at the lower wall and that wall falls outward, what does that create? Yeah, stepping stones or a ramp so they can now get to up above the lower wall. Same thing happens to the top wall. If it falls down, stones are easier to climb than grass. So that allowed them to kind of go in over the top wall. Does that make sense? The mud brick, which was not a hard rock, but it gave them some footing to go up versus just, that's showing grass. I don't know if it was grass or sand or dirt or what, but that was the reason. That was part of the reason why the walls, and excavation proves this today, the walls fell outward. So, any questions, comments? Has anyone ever been there and seen the wall?
It would make sense that it fell down the hill.
Yeah.
And you will find contradictory information that Jericho has been built and rebuilt so
Yeah.
many times that they can't guarantee that what they excavated
Is true.
our walls of Jericho.
That's why my question, if you've ever been there, is a trick question because we're not exactly sure where it was completely. Chris, you raised your hand? Okay. Right. Right.
But one possibility is they were promised that they were going to be given the city.
Correct.
And if the walls would have fell inward, that would have taken out
A lot of the city.
people.
Mm-hmm.
And then God actually took the city
Right.
in that sense.
Right.
Rather than the people actually going in and fulfilling part of what they were commanded to do.
Yeah. Good point.
So it could have hit Rahab's house.
Well, let's talk about Rahab's house for a minute. First of all, Joshua reminded his soldiers, save Rahab and her folks. According to the Bible, Rahab's house was built into the outer wall. If the walls fell, how was her house spared? If all the walls fell, how could her house still be standing?
Her guest bedroom suddenly became very airy.
The Bible doesn't say that the wall on the outside of her house was still there. It just says that they went into her house and brought the people out.
Okay.
So we know that they were protected regardless of whether or not the wall was there or not.
Okay. In 1907 to 1909, a German archaeologist found that there was still part of the north wall standing. And that wall was the closest to the woods that the spies probably ran into. So speculation is that was part of Rahab's house or apartment or whatever you want, however it was. So archaeologists are saying part of that wall stood during all this fighting and everything. So again, we don't know. That's speculation based on what they have found. So perhaps. Very good. So the walls come down. People go in. Two spies saves Rahab. And as Larry said, her father, her mother, her brothers, all her relatives, and all that she had. So has anyone ever heard the speculation that Joshua married Rahab? Has anyone ever heard of that? We don't think that's true because Matthew 1:5 says Salmon, the father of Boaz, was married to Rahab. And of course, Jesus comes through the linkage of Rahab, right? So,
Joshua's not of the tribe of Judah either.
no. So, anyway, I got 3 minutes, Court, if I stay with my promise. So, anyway, So they go and battle Ai. What were the people to do with the plunder from Ai? No, Ai. I'm chapter 8. I'm in chapter 8 now. They're supposed to take they could take the plunder and cattle for themselves. This is versus Jericho when they're supposed to turn everything into the treasure. Chapter 7 of Joshua talks about Achan, how Achan actually took some stuff for himself, and the consequences of that. When they destroyed Ai, question number 9 is, how many is all? When it says all was destroyed, all is 12,000, based on page 95. Joshua hung the king of Ai on a tree, then threw his body from the city gates. Chapter 10, the king of Jerusalem hears about all this. He calls other kings together to fight the Israelites in Gibeon. That's all those kings are destroyed and their armies are destroyed. Joshua 10 verse 8, what did God say to Joshua? Question number 10, not to fear because the kings have been given into his hand. In other words, God gave Joshua the kings. Joshua marches all night from Gilgal. That's in Joshua 10 verse 9. Gilgal was approximately 3,300 feet above sea level with a distance about 20 miles. That Joshua and his army marched that night in an 8 or 10 hour march. Whenever we talk about Joshua did this and Joshua did that, a lot of times we have to include his army in that statement. So they get to, God sends giant hailstorms to defeat the Canaanites. That's in Joshua 10, 10 and 11. But daylight's running out, so what does Joshua do? Look at number 11. It comes from verses 12 and 13 of Joshua 10. This is always a good story to talk about. What did Joshua ask God to do? Stop the sun and stop the moon. He also talked about stopping the moon. What was the reason for stopping the sun? Stay light so they could finish the battle, wasn't it? Time was running out and they had not accomplished what they needed to do. Verse 13 talks about the book of Jasher. It's probably a collection of compilation of ancient Hebrew songs and poems. As far as we know, based on Scripture, verse 14, there was no day like that before it or after it. We do have an example in Isaiah 38 where the sun's shadow backed up 10 degrees, but it never stopped completely. So the 5 kings of Makeda get together. They're defeated. Kings are taken care of, killed, blah, blah, hung from trees. Joshua's army conquered all the southern Canaanite kingdoms. Chapter 11, Jabin, king of Hazor, his armies try to defeat him. They get defeated. They had numbers the sand of the seashore, Joshua 11:4, page 98. God encourages Joshua and tells him not to be afraid. Joshua attacks and defeats the northern armies. Joshua burned Hazor and killed its king, Joshua 11. Joshua does all that Moses has commanded him to do. That's verse 15. And chapter 11 ends with the statement, the land was at rest from war. So the Israelites defeated everybody they needed to defeat to conquer the land, stay in their land. Chapters 23 and 24 is similar to what Moses did. He gathers all the people together and he basically reminds them of what God has done for them over the course of time. Joshua was how old when he died? He was 110 based on Joshua 24 verse 29. It's not in the book, but Joshua 24 verse 32, they buried Joseph's bones, and in verse 33, Eleazar dies and they bury him. And that's how the book of Joshua plays out. Any questions, comments? That's about the 20-minute lesson of the book of Joshua. And you can go back and read it more in depth later. Any questions or comments? Next week we'll look at the book of Judges. It'll be chapter 8 in your story. So we'll talk about Judges next week. Anything else? I apologize for running a little bit late. Blame Todd. Always blame somebody else. Blame Todd. So anyway, have a blessed week. If you're staying and eating with us, hopefully they're about ready for us. So we'll go back and then we'll have a meeting later. Some of us had 2 meetings, right?